Massive Shadow Fleet tankers rested in silence, poised to swallow millions of barrels of crude. Then, an unprecedented anomaly lit up the Nebo M long-range VHF radar hundreds of kilometers south. Over 70 unidentified signals, stealthy and ominous, advanced toward Russian skies. The source spanned 1,000 kilometers, carrying over 3 tons of deadly explosives. At the Leningrad Oblast Air Defense Command Center, sirens screamed once the 91 NSC Big Bird Wide Area Surveillance Radar confirmed the threat. The operation had been plotted months ago in Kiev, yet the 1,000 kilometers reach was daunting. The real challenge, Russia's air defense network, NATO classified as an anti-access area denial bubble, stretched across the entire corridor. Russian generals held their composure. Their systems were designed for this precise moment. Russia's layered air defenses sprang to life flawlessly. The 92 N6E gravestone radars of S-400 batteries near St. Petersburg began locking targets one by one. Lower down, Pantsir S-1 cannons unleashed twin 2A38 M30mm rounds, 5,000 per minute, a wall of fire raining from the sky. Yet the chaos they faced was deliberate. It was a masterful deception, drawing their defensive umbrella away from Primorsk. Waves of decoys targeted Zilovsk, Tosno, Pakarskoye, Usmino, and the Linosov district. Simultaneously, Volosovsky, Tosnensky, Gachinsky, Linosovsky, and Pushkinsky drew focus, pulling attention from the mightiest S-400 batteries. In a Gachinsky air shelter, a young lieutenant watched the last target vanish from his screen, submitting his routine report. Sector clear, all destroyed. This report, climbing the command chain, set the stage for the greatest miscalculation in Russian military history. What they saw as victory was actually a trap. For this intricate operation, 70 drones were deployed across Leningrad and St. Petersburg. 35 AQ-400 scythes distracted St. Petersburg. The remaining 40 formed the main offensive across Leningrad Oblast. At the core, 15 UJ-26 Bober ERs targeted Primorsk port. Success depended on some drones slipping past the inferno of defenses to reach their objectives. Every detail mattered. The UJ-26 Bober ERs, the assassination squad, were chosen for this mission. Standard Bobers lacked range. Only the extended range ERs could complete the 1,000-kilometer one-way flight with a 40-kilo warhead. Additional fuel tanks and optimized engines made this possible. The EW Banshee 7s supporting the squad. Required the same long-range frame to accompany the strike team, carrying advanced jammers instead of explosives. Their task was to guide the Bober drones to the target, covering a long 1,000 kilometers route. The motive for choosing the AQ-400 Scythe as bait was its simplicity. Its wooden frame not only gave it a low radar trace, but also enabled well mass output. Hundreds of drones needed for a saturation attack could thus be built quickly and cheaply. At midnight, over 70 drones lifted off from points across Ukraine and slowly started slipping into Russia at low altitude. The opening hours unfolded in utter radio silence, the drones skimming terrain shadows. Guided by preloaded terrain grids, they slipped through valleys and timber lines, staying beneath the sweep of Russia's main radar nets. It became a harsh trial for each drone's autonomous guidance suite. Now again, several units were lost along the punishing route, some striking rising ground, others failing under heavy technical strain. This loss rate was accepted from the start. After crossing the Russian frontier, the dynamics shifted suddenly. They no longer needed stealth, they needed control. When Russia's air defense grid awoke, it reacted just as Ukraine expected. The 91 N6E Big Bird radars tracked the scattered swarm coming from hundreds of kilometers away. The system quickly shifted priority to the swarm it judged the greatest threat. 35 scythes moving towards St. Petersburg drew its full attention. Massive 48 N6 missiles from S-400 units hunted these light plywood decoys one by one. For Russia, it looked like flawless coordinated defense. For Ukraine, it was the first planned sacrifice on the board. Meanwhile, the other 40 drones drifting across Leningrad Oblast fields began a harsh cat-and-mouse duel with Pantsir and Buk batteries in active motion. A Pantsir S-1 battery, stationed near Volosovsky, locked onto a low-running UJ-26 Bulber. The Pantsir's 1 RS-2-1E tracking radar captured the drone with clean precision and clarity. The Russian operator viewed all its telemetry figures on the fire control console display. Yet the Ukrainian operator likewise watched that same radar beam fixed onto the Bulber on his own mission screen real-time. He stayed composed as a nearby Banshee 7 had already made its countershift. The Banshee sensed the Pantsir's X-band output and hurled an intense jamming pulse on that very channel, forcing the Russian operator's display to flood instantly with blinding white light. The lock collapsed. As a final measure, the operator unleashed the twin A-38 M30mm guns, but Bulber had already slid past the fury of fire and vanished into the shadowed night. The same clash unfolded repeatedly that night, echoing through the dark. The Russians stayed determined, and their firepower stayed severe. Closer to Leningrad's center, they brought down 33 drones in a rush of fire and metal. All units moving towards central St. Petersburg were destroyed. Still, this was a planned loss for Ukraine. Each drone that fell opened a gap for another craft arriving from behind to slip through unnoticed. As the lieutenant relayed his briefing, from a blindfold of chaos wrought by fire and thunder, a lethal cadre of 7 custom-forged UJ-26 Bulber ER drones slipped past the primary shield line. In mere moments, these 7 machines would drive precise steel scalpels, each armed with a 40-kilo piercing charge, straight into the vital economic pulse of Russia itself. The Russian commander stared only at a fragment of the vast tableau before them, on the verge of missing its full revelation. It was 4:45 a.m. Primorsk Port's Pantsir battery jolted awake as 7 faint echoes flickered onto its scope and closed in with speed, catching the crew unprepared. In panic, it fired, sending 57 E-6 missiles roaring outward beyond. But the incoming targets flew too low, too swift, and far too near. The 7 Bulber drones split into 2 packs, with a final sweeping maneuver above the port. 3 droves toward the pumping station. The port's core, the Pantsir's missiles, struck one of the trios in midair, only a few hundred meters from its mark. But that was the 803 Russians' final comfort that night. The last 2 Bulber drones plunged in to finish their task. The first drone, bearing a TBG-7V thermobaric payload, slammed into the station's primary control block. The blast devoured all oxygen in the sealed interior, unleashing a crushing wave that hurled the walls outward. Moments later, the second drone dived into the central pipeline hub. The detonation ripped apart the port's vital arteries. Meanwhile, the remaining 4 Bulber drones fixed their paths on 2 tankers moored at the pier. The opening pair veered for the Kapitan Lob. The first drone, armed with a KZ-6-shaped charge, impacted just under the vessel's bridge, wiping out every electronic unit within. The second drone slammed into a main cargo tank filled with oil, igniting a blazing inferno that tore across the hull. The final 2 Bulber drones designated the Sergei Gorskov as their mark. Their strikes mirrored each other. One slammed into the engine sector, the other into the loading arrays. 4 of the UAVs hit 2 Afroax-class tankers tied to the shadow fleet known as Kusto and Kailun. Kusto was a carrier run by Solstice Corp, holding a deadweight tonnage DWT of 115,000. Kailun was another Afroax vessel listed under Axaronix Limited and operating with a DWT rating of 110,000. Both had long sailed under dubious flags within global insurance registries, marked with suspicion. At the moment of the strike, each tanker waited at the loading berths, and as the drones descended, the final phase of loading neared completion. That was the instant the fierce blaze began. Its scale was not just tactical, but calculated, striking not only storage tanks, but the vital heart of the shipping grid itself. Only 42 seconds after the first detonation, a second blast erupted, bringing down Primorsk Port's number 2 pumping station. A third drone then tore through the upper facade of the port's control center. With circuits failing, the whole port plunged into emergency shutdown. But the shutdown signal never reached its core, for the energy command system had already been struck and left mute now. The fourth and fifth drones hammered the loading arms at the sterns of the tankers. A blaze erupted on the Kusto, and fuel began spilling from the Kailun. The sixth and seventh strikes tore through the pump valve sector. After these hits, controlling the fire was no longer possible. Primorsk was vanishing in heat. Within minutes, the entire Primorsk port resembled a burning abyss, with 2 tankers aflame and a shattered pumping station. Hours after the strike, Russia's defense ministry claimed 221 Ukrainian drones were downed overnight across the nation, insisting every assault had been thwarted. Yet those statements meant nothing besides satellite frames from Primorsk, exposing ruin worth billions. The hit sites were deliberate. Primorsk alone handled nearly 20% of Russia's seaborne oil flow. The struck Afro-Axe-class tankers, each built to haul nearly 700,000 barrels of crude, were pivotal ships within the Shadow Fleet, moving oil beyond sanctions. Primorsk's harbor enabled an annual export stream worth 15 billion. The crude leaving Primorsk formed a corridor for barrel-based flows that were hard to trace and even harder for rivals to restrain. Sold into hidden shadow fleets, their cargo fed a secret market, and shutting this passage directly strained Russia's war chest. The routine flow of 1 million barrels a day, cutting it burned away roughly $70 to $80 million every sunrise. St. Petersburg's Pulavo airport activated its full plan. 11 planes shifted to backup fields. At dawn, swarms of UAVs flooding the sky forced civil-military traffic into chaos. When the safety instincts surged first from radar and tower watchers, the entire operation faltered at once. Data flowing from the Leningrad Regional Administration and Airport Control was quickly funneled to state authority. Over St. Petersburg, screens swarmed with chaos, UAV debris falling across the countryside, fragments landing near neighborhoods. The airspace quivered under strain. All of it dragged the operator's focus upward, while the incoming wave sweeping in from the sea locked its aim onto the terminal. From a technical viewpoint, Ukraine's long-reach UAV strategy delivered 3 outcomes in this operation. First, it removed the margin for range miscalculations. When the attack variants of these UAVs were examined, it became evident that 2 distinct categories had been deployed. These UAVs were engineered to mislead Russian sensors. Russian defenses were tailored to counter only a limited set of advanced incoming threats. Ukraine's swarm doctrine overloaded the system's decision chain through sheer target saturation. The purpose of EW tools like the Banshee 7 wasn't full radar blackout, but to drown operators in decoys and distortion until the authentic threat vanished in the noise. Recovered debris around St. Petersburg revealed evidence of such platforms. Findings in Usmino and Pikavskoe showed they were carriers outfitted with guided navigation suites. Debris scattered in fields, revealing the careful engineering behind them. This meant Ukraine had flown not only to strike, but also to mislead. And that misdirection rendered the impact zone unseen. Proof arrived when images of the blaze surfaced across social media. The fire resisted every attempt to contain it, and the official briefing that followed left no option but to acknowledge the assault. Worse still, on a morning when the port was running at full output, the Russian command failed to anticipate the strike. Primorsk was believed to be a deep, fortified, and formidable harbor. Yet even with the 6th Combined Arms Army in Leningrad, the 2nd Independent Motorized Division, and the Baltic Fleet's headquarters nearby, a defensive gap remained. These formations were postured mainly for threats coming from the west. In essence, their vigilance faced outward, not toward the vulnerabilities hidden within. This was because the Russian command cadre never anticipated such a scenario. The naval post at Kronstadt, the missile and artillery elements on the Luga Belt, the air defense meshes near Luminosov, and the command lattice along the Gachina-Pushkin-Agalatovo corridor had all been operating under rigid threat script for 3 years, with routines molded by a southeast-central Russia outlook that never shifted so fully. A deep-range drone strike capable of shutting the Baltic port had long been dismissed under this model. The shift-change lull and the sudden swelling of the coastal sea bands created subtle delays across the perimeter. As these elements aligned, a rare window for infiltration widened near the terminal in the dark hours here. The true shock was that the Russian officers were not expected to be the focus, but the broader surrounding axis instead. Yet the outskirts merely blurred the tableau, while the blow landed dead center. Put simply, Ukraine's forces prevailed by collecting precise intel and selecting the perfect moment. The strike swept in from afar, pierced through the perimeter, and within it scorched everything in reach. On paper, Russia's defensive canopy in the sector appears formidable. But in reality, when paired with low-altitude Jersey masking and layered phantom echoes, it can yield lapses those intervals. Such was the situation on that September 12th dawn. The radars were awake, the networks returned their usual cues, yet the setup still failed to halt low-profile drones from slipping into the terminal, flying low, brushing over the C-band, entering fixed antenna sightlines only at the last seconds to shut the forward interception gap. This geometry forces even upper-tier systems, like the S-400, into a desperate race against time. By the moment your radar catches the incoming threat, it is already closing upon you. And if the timing slips, the fact that the Bober skimmed low meant that, with Earth's curve-limiting vision, even the strongest 91N6E Big Bird arrays spotted them only in the final seconds for a brief instant. That narrow gap was never enough for a clean interception. The flood of damage reports in the dawn panorama did little beyond prompting brief shutdown orders and sector-by-sector warning sirens across Pulovo above the St. Petersburg skyline. The outcome was not a mere stretch of flames, but a halted and shadowed fleet logged for the first time as twin ship blazes raged beneath the horizon. This strike exposed a new truth about modern conflict, etched into the night with cold intent. Wars were no longer decided by those wielding the priciest arsenals, but by those who dared to use their tools with sharper vision and greater nerve. That night, Ukraine proved how a superpower could be forced down by a 1,000-kilometer gambit. Thank you for watching.